Okay, so you're here with us on the deep dive because, well, let's face it, you like getting smart, like really getting into the nitty-gritty of things.
Exactly. You want to cut through all the noise and find out what really matters, and maybe, just maybe, have a few of those aha moments along the way.
Right, and all without feeling like you're back in school cramming for a test. Well, today, we're doing just that. We're going to take a deep dive
Deep dive.
into something pretty fascinating, actually. We're going to look back at what people were hoping for and even predicting for the
It's
2020s.
right. We've got this online article. It's from around, I think, 2018 or 2019. It's titled, get this, Top 10 Things We Can Hope For in the 2020s.
Oh, I love a good top 10 list.
Yeah, but, like most things on the internet, there's a little bit of clickbait going on.
Mhm.
The article actually covers way more than just 10 topics.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's a real mix of, hopes and fears, predictions, kind of all over the place. It's amazing you really get a feel for what was on people's minds back then.
So what makes this particular piece so interesting besides the clickbait title?
Well, it's just how informal and opinionated it is.
Yeah.
It's not some kind of official report or anything. It's just one person's raw thoughts and feelings about the future.
I see. So it's like a time capsule in a way.
Exactly. A time capsule of hopes and anxieties.
I like that. So our mission today, if you choose to accept it, is to crack open this time capsule
Yes.
and really try to understand what people were thinking and feeling as the 2010s were ending and the 2020s were just beginning.
Yeah.
What were they excited about? What were they worried about?
And as we go through these points, it's important to remember that, this is just a snapshot in time.
Right, right. It's a specific moment.
Seeing these past perspectives can
Yeah.
actually be really eye-opening when you look back from where we are now.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive right in, shall we? One of the first big hopes, and maybe a bit of a lofty one, is for world peace.
Yeah, classic.
Of course, right? I mean, who doesn't want world peace?
It's like the ultimate dream.
The author definitely expresses that desire, but they also seem pretty realistic about it.
Oh, for sure. They point out that given all the conflicts happening in the world back then, true world peace was probably not going to happen anytime soon.
There's also this interesting idea that maybe a little bit of disagreement, like minor conflicts, can actually make the world more dynamic.
Right, right. It's like they're saying that if everyone agreed on absolutely everything, the world might become kind of dot stale, I guess.
Interesting points. Like, you need a little bit of friction to create energy, maybe, but obviously there's a huge difference between, healthy debate and full-blown war.
Oh, absolutely. No one's arguing for war,
Yeah.
but it makes you think about the role of different perspectives and even, a little bit of healthy conflict in pushing society forward.
For sure. Despite that thought, the author does come back to that sincere desire for world peace, and it feels like that wish kind of underlies a lot of these other hopes as well.
I agree. And it leads perfectly to this next profoundly important hope. No more shootings at schools.
Oh, yeah. This one really hits home. The author directly expresses this deep desire to see an end to these horrible events. And they even specifically mention the Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida back in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
which, would have been very fresh and raw in their mind at that time.
Absolutely. It was a truly horrific tragedy. And what's really striking is how this hope is phrased as a question. It's like they're grappling with this really fundamental question.
Like, how do we actually get there?
Yeah, they wonder, how long will it take to put aside our differences and really start treating each other with kindness and respect?
Yeah.
Like, can we actually beat our swords into plowshares, so to speak?
It's that longing for that olive branch, as they put it.
Exactly.
Now, moving on to the economy, things get a little more, shall we say, complicated.
A little more nuanced.
Exactly. The author lays out these two really different visions of what a better economy would actually look like. It's almost like they're having a debate with themselves.
Yeah, for sure. On the one hand, they express this concern about higher taxes, especially for, the hardworking people, having to support those who they see as lazy.
It's that age-old debate about, personal responsibility versus social safety nets.
Exactly. But then, like you said, there's this other vision they present, one where there's this well-structured, secure global economy with plenty of jobs for everyone.
And everyone's living a good life, right? It's like
Yeah.
two completely different viewpoints.
It is, and it makes you wonder, how would these two visions even coexist? It's interesting because the author tries to bridge these two ideas by suggesting a mix. They say a mix of privatized, nationalized, and collectivized.
So what do you think they mean by that? Like some sort of hybrid system?
Yeah, possibly. Maybe they're envisioning a system where, Some essential services are run by the government, nationalized, while other industries are left to operate more freely, based on market competition, so privatized.
And then maybe you have things like worker cooperatives, community-owned businesses, so collectivized.
Right. All working together to create a better economy.
More opportunity, more freedom.
Exactly. It's really interesting to see them trying to grapple with these different ideas about how the economy should work.
Okay, let's move on to the next big hope, better politics. And it sounds like the author has some strong opinions about this one, particularly when it comes to American politics.
Oh, yeah. They call for a massive revamp of the whole system.
Wow, massive revamp. That's a pretty big statement.
It is. But they also get specific about what they want to see. They want politicians who are more experienced, more understanding.
More connected to the people they represent.
Exactly. And not just, focused on their own agendas or party lines.
They also emphasize that this isn't just about one side or the other. They talk about the need for improvement in both left-wing and right-wing parties. It seems like there's this real desire to move away from the kind of extreme polarization that was happening back then.
For sure. And they briefly touch on this idea in the context of developing countries, too. Yeah. There's a quick mention about hoping for better leadership there as well.
This is not just an American issue they're concerned about. It's more of a global hope for better governance. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a more environmentally driven hope. All cities have 100% renewable energy. That's a big one.
It is. And it really gets to the heart of some of the biggest challenges facing the world back then and even now, I guess.
Climate change, pollution.
Exactly. The author clearly wants to see a future where we're no longer relying on fossil fuels and polluting the planet.
And where cities are powered by clean, renewable energy. But they also seem to recognize that this is a huge undertaking.
Oh, yeah. They acknowledge that it would take a long time and a lot of effort to actually achieve this. But then they throw out this interesting prediction.
What's that?
They have this personal hypothesis that all cities could be running on 100% renewable energy by the year 2043.
2043, huh? I wonder where that specific year came from. Is that based on anything?
They don't really say. So it's probably just a guess based on their understanding of how fast technology was developing, or maybe just wishful thinking.
Interesting. Okay, moving on from the big picture of renewable energy to something a bit more, well, controversial. Animals gain rights. And wow, the author has a very strong reaction to this one.
To put it mildly.
They actually say, God, this is stupid, which is pretty blunt.
Yeah, they're not holding back. They're clearly against the idea of putting animal life on the same level as human life.
Which, is a perspective that a lot of people probably shared back then.
Oh, for sure. But it's interesting to think about how attitudes towards animal rights have evolved since then. I mean, there's definitely been a growing movement towards recognizing animal sentience and expanding our moral considerations beyond just humans.
Right, right. It's that whole debate about whether animals should have the same legal rights as humans. But even if you don't agree with that, there's still this idea that we have a responsibility to treat animals ethically and prevent unnecessary suffering.
Absolutely. And the author does acknowledge that. They specifically condemn animal abuse, calling it awful and terrible. So it's not like they don't care about animals at all, but they do draw a line.
Yeah, a very clear line. There's this other interesting point they make, too. They kind of suggest that when people talk about animal rights, they're mostly thinking about dogs.
Which I guess, makes sense in a way. Dogs are often seen as companions, part of the family.
Right. But it also raises the question of, well, what about all the other animals?
Exactly. It makes you think about how our perception of different species might influence our views on their rights.
Okay, let's lighten things up a bit. Next on the list is better music. And this section definitely has a bit of a nostalgic vibe to it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The author clearly misses the kind of music they grew up with.
They specifically complain about what they see as a decline in the quality of mainstream music, starting around the year 2000. They find it bland, repetitive.
And they even name-drop early Britney Spears songs as an example of what they consider good music,
Yeah.
with catchy tunes. And that traditional song structure, verse, chorus, bridge.
The good old days of pop music. It's funny, they seem to blame the rise of genres like hip-hop, EDM, and DJs for this perceived decline.
It's like they think these genres have led to music that's lacking in, I don't know, depth or something.
They even describe some contemporary trap music as just chants. It makes
Hmm.
you wonder, is this just a matter of personal taste?
Right, like is it just that the author's musical preferences haven't kept up with the
Or
times?
is there something deeper going on? Like maybe these changes in music reflect some kind of broader cultural shift, something about how music is produced, how it's consumed.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a bit of both, personal taste and these bigger cultural forces all mixed together.
All right, let's delve into a really big one now. Better society. This is a pretty broad category, but it touches on some really important issues.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really real. The author expresses this deep desire for a society that's free from all these harmful standards and stereotypes.
Like outdated ideas about gender roles, unrealistic beauty standards.
Exactly. They want to see a world where people are judged based on their character, not on these superficial things.
And where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their background or who they are.
But they also seem pretty pessimistic about actually seeing this kind of change in their lifetime.
Yeah, they specifically mention sexism, racism, homophobia, and the lack of seriousness around mental health as major problems that need to be addressed.
And, these are issues that unfortunately we're still grappling with today.
Absolutely. It makes you think about how much progress has actually been made and how much further we still have to go.
And it's interesting to consider this in the context of your own interests. Like how do these anxieties about social inequalities, which were very present back then, connect with the conversations happening around those same issues today?
Great point. Okay, next up is less pollution, and this one seems particularly important to the author.
It does. And it makes sense. Given that they were studying to become an environmental engineer, they clearly care deeply about the planet.
They have this whole wish list, actually. They want less pollution of all kinds, more renewable energy, less reliance on fossil fuels. They even call for better environmental policies and improvements in energy efficiency.
It's a pretty comprehensive vision for a cleaner, more sustainable future.
And they also make a very clear statement about the reality of global warming. Like, this is happening and we need to do something about it.
They even express this hope for a worldwide ban on plastic.
Which, some countries were already starting to implement back then.
Yeah, they mention Canada and India as examples. So you can see that this movement towards reducing plastic waste was already gaining momentum.
Okay, moving on. The author brings up the term third world countries and suggests that maybe it's time to start using a different term,
Yeah, they propose using developing countries instead.
which I think is a really thoughtful point. It's about using language that's more accurate and respectful.
Exactly. It acknowledges that these countries are not static. They're in a process of development and growth.
Okay, now we get to some of the more recent additions to this list, starting with fictional child pornography gets banned, and the author takes a very strong stance on this one.
They do. They argue that even just drawings or depictions of this kind of content contribute to the problem of child exploitation.
And they seem particularly concerned about certain online platforms becoming safe spaces for this kind of material.
It's a really complex issue, and there are definitely different perspectives on it. But the author's viewpoint is very clear. They believe that any form of child pornography, even fictional, is harmful and should be banned.
All right, the next newcomer is a bit more lighthearted. No more Minecraft mob votes. This one made me laugh a little, I have to admit.
Yeah, it's definitely specific, but it also shows how passionate people can be about their hobbies, even something like a video game.
The author seems really frustrated by the fact that potentially good ideas for the game get rejected just because they don't win these community votes.
And they even give a concrete example, the glow squid, which apparently won one of these votes, even though there were other more interesting options.
It's a really small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it clearly bothers them.
It's like that saying, the devil's in the details. Sometimes these seemingly minor things can actually be really important to people.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to something a bit more universal. More intelligent people.
Ah, yes, a classic.
Oh,
Always a good thing to have more intelligent people around, right?
the author's reasoning for this one is actually pretty practical.
Hmm.
They believe that having more intelligent people is essential for solving big problems.
But, curing cancer, inventing time travel.
Exactly. The kinds of things that require serious brain power.
And they also point out that historically, intelligent people haven't always had it easy,
Yeah, they talk about how intellectuals have often been persecuted for their belief.
which is a sobering thought. But then they also throw in this funny suggestion. They say that maybe if we banned Fortnite and TikTok, we'd see a rise in global IQ.
A little social commentary snuck in there.
Always got to keep things interesting.
Okay, the next hope is for world hunger eradicated. And this one, I think, really speaks to the heart of what it means to be human.
It does. It's this fundamental desire to see everyone have enough to eat.
To eliminate suffering.
Exactly. But the author also seems pretty realistic about the challenges involved.
They point out that there are all these complex factors at play, like poverty and overpopulation.
And that even though we produce enough food to feed everyone, getting that food to the people who need it, especially in places like Africa, is a huge logistical challenge.
A huge challenge. So while the author clearly wants to see world hunger eradicated, they also recognize that it's probably not going to be an easy fix.
Yeah, it's a reminder that some problems are just really, really hard to solve.
Okay, now we get into some more specifically American political hopes, and I think these really reflect the political climate at the time.
Well, for sure. The first one is a better president after Joe Biden.
And right alongside that, we have Donald Trump wins the 2024 United States presidential election.
It's fascinating to see these two completely opposite hopes presented side by side.
Yeah,
It really shows how divided the country was and probably still is to some extent.
absolutely. And it's a reminder that these were written before the outcomes of those elections were known. So it's like a glimpse into what people were hoping for or maybe even fearing.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to something that's probably closer to home for a lot of our listeners. Parents raising their children better.
Parenting, always a hot topic.
The author has some pretty strong opinions about this one.
They do. They express this concern about overprotective parenting, the whole everyone gets a trophy mentality.
Right, like, are we coddling kids too much?
They seem to think so. They argue that this kind of parenting doesn't prepare kids for the real world.
And they make this really interesting point about how kids in the past seem to have more freedom, even though crime rates were actually higher.
It makes you think about how our perceptions of risk and safety have changed over time, and whether we've gone too far in the other direction.
Right, are we overprotecting our kids to the point where they're not developing the resilience they need?
They also tentatively connect this to the perceived increase in sensitivity and people being easily offended.
So they're suggesting there might be a link between overprotective parenting and a more sensitive, easily offended society. It's an interesting hypothesis. Okay, now we get to a very serious topic. Death penalty for pedophilia. And the author makes a very clear distinction here.
Yes, they differentiate between people who have pedophilic urges but haven't acted on them, who they believe might need treatment.
Right, recognizing that it could be a mental illness.
Exactly. But then they say that for people who do act on those urges, there should be no mercy. The death penalty.
A very strong stance. And then there's this random aside where they mention that they don't like PewDiePie, which, seems kind of out of place.
Yeah, it's a bit of a non sequitur.
Yeah.
But it also shows how personal this whole list is.
Yeah.
It's not just a bunch of abstract ideas. It's filtered through the author's own experiences and opinions.
For sure. And this leads directly into the next hope, which is simply less pedophilia. I think it's pretty clear how the author feels about this issue.
Yeah, they don't mince words. They express disgust and anger and a desire to see pedophilia completely eradicated. And they also voice frustration at the fact that, sometimes things like video games get more attention than this issue.
Which I think speaks to the intensity of their feelings about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that for some people, these issues are deeply personal and evoke very strong emotions.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that's been in the news a lot lately. Free healthcare.
Ah, yes, another perennial debate.
The author points out that the U.S. is one of the few developed countries without universal healthcare.
And they present a particular perspective on how this could be achieved. They suggest removing Trump from office and increasing taxes on the wealthy to fund it.
Which, reflects a certain political viewpoint.
Definitely. But then they also present a counter-argument.
Which is?
That if healthcare was free, doctors wouldn't get paid enough and might end up quitting.
So you have two very different perspectives on the same issue.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there are no easy answers when it comes to healthcare, or most complex social issues, for that matter.
All right. The hope that coronavirus is defeated is particularly interesting when we consider that this was written before the pandemic even started.
Like a premonition, almost.
The author expresses this deep desire for a return to normalcy, an end to all the deaths. They talk about the need for a global vaccination effort, a world without masks.
It's so poignant when you think about what was about to happen.
It really highlights how quickly things can change and how even the most unexpected events can completely reshape our world.
Absolutely. Okay, next up is less liberals. And this one definitely reflects a particular ideological viewpoint.
It does, but it's interesting because the author doesn't just present this viewpoint and leave it at that. They actually include a counterargument,
Right. They defend liberalism, listing some of its core principles.
like freedom of speech, free markets.
Exactly. And they also make a distinction between liberals and what they call social justice warriors.
So they're trying to nuance the discussion a bit,
Exactly. And then there's this comment from someone else calling the whole less liberals viewpoint stupid and saying it probably comes from a dumb Trump apologist.
which just goes to show how polarized things were and still are, I guess.
For sure.
Okay, the next hope is for everyone to be more accepting of different beliefs. And the author approaches this from a Christian perspective.
Yeah, they talk about the importance of caring for all people, regardless of their beliefs.
And they reject the idea that Jesus died only for certain groups.
Right. They believe that everyone is deserving of love and compassion.
And while they obviously hold their own religious beliefs, they also advocate for respectful dialogue with people of other faiths.
And importantly, they include a call for acceptance of atheists and ex-Muslims.
Expanding that circle of tolerance.
Exactly. They challenge this idea that one particular group is the most oppressed and argue that we should be accepting of everyone, regardless of their beliefs.
Okay, let's get a little sci-fi now. Time travel.
Ah, who hasn't dreamed of traveling through time?
Right, but the author seems pretty cautious about it.
Oh, yeah. They're definitely not jumping on the time travel bandwagon. They actually express a lot of concerns about the potential consequences.
Like, even small changes to the past could have huge unforeseen effects on the future.
Exactly. The butterfly effect.
And they even question whether time travel is even possible,
Yeah, they're skeptical about that and about magic powers in general.
which, is fair enough. But even if it were possible, they seem to think it would be best to just leave things as they are. Don't mess with the past.
Right, because who knows what you might accidentally change.
Exactly. Okay, the next newcomer is PETA Shutdown. And this one seems to be driven by some pretty strong negative feelings towards the organization.
Oh, yeah. The author calls them obnoxious and hypocritical. And they seem particularly bothered by PETA's euthanasia practices in shelters.
There's also a mention of a specific accusation from someone named Ice Fox Plays about PETA supposedly being okay with killing pit bulls.
Right. And then there's a counterargument presented defending pit bulls and saying that it's bad owners, not the breed itself, that are to blame for aggressive behavior.
It's a reminder that even within a single issue, there can be a lot of different perspectives and disagreements.
Absolutely.
Okay, the penultimate hope is about artificial intelligence. And the author has a decidedly negative view of this one.
Very negative. They seem to be heavily influenced by dystopian movies where, AI takes over the world and wipes out humanity.
They even say on the planet.
It's a pretty bleak outlook, but it also reflects this very real fear that a lot of people have about the potential for AI to become too powerful and uncontrollable.
And maybe even see humans as a threat.
Exactly. It's like that classic sci-fi trope of the machines turning against their creators.
All right, and finally, we have the hope that Russia stops interfering the West's politics. This one seems to be rooted in the geopolitical tensions that were happening at the time.
Definitely. The author doesn't hide their dislike for the Russian government and its leaders. And they specifically mention the belief that Russia interfered in the 2016 U.S. election.
It's a reminder of how complex and interconnected the world is, and how actions in one country can have ripple effects across the globe.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the hopes and anxieties of the late 2010s, it's amazing to see just how wide-ranging these concerns and aspirations were.
From the personal, like better parenting and better music, to the global, like world peace and climate change. It's like a tapestry of human experience woven together with these threads of hope and fear.
Exactly. And it really makes you think, doesn't it, about how much has changed since then and how much hasn't. And it makes you wonder, what are the defining hopes and anxieties of the 2020s now that we're a few years in?
What would a list like this look like if someone were writing it today?
What new challenges have emerged? What new technologies have captured our imaginations? What old problems are still plaguing us?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And we'll be exploring these questions and more in future episodes of The Deep Dive.
So stay tuned and keep thinking deeply.
Thanks for listening.